That's the subject of today. And in that subject of today, we'll also add some encryption, HTTPS. We'll also look into cross-origin request. That's kind of a mouth breaker. We'll also look into CORS and also look into caching. So all those subjects will be handled today. My name is Danny Wind. I'm a Delphi MVP trainer and developer in the Netherlands. And I sometimes do sessions like this and sometimes live sessions in the Netherlands or in Europe or even worldwide. There is also a Pascal magazine, Blast Pascal magazine, and the articles for this session have been published in the Blast Pascal magazine. And it's a worldwide Delphi and Lazarus magazine. Okay, so I've got some audio from one of the attendees. So I'll just go and try to mute it.
That was me. I'm sorry, I muted myself.
Oh, yeah, sure. Okay, so we're all good now. That was Jim McKeith, by the way, so he'll be around for some of the time. And if you have any questions, he'll pick that up and he'll ask, and we'll discuss those questions with you. Okay, let me go to the slides back. Yeah, okay, there's a download for the document, source, and slides, and there's also a handout in the chat panel. A handout in the chat panel is actually the articles that were published in the Blast Pascal magazine. And you can just open that in your browser. If you see blank pages, just download the PDF and then open it locally. And then it should work. Some browsers have some issues with the makeup of the PDF. If you're still having issues, please let me know. I can send it out to you, or we can distribute it in some other way. But to be honest, the PDF is also included in this link here. And if you just open that link, and I will open that link and paste it into the chat panel as well. I'll just go there and I'll paste that in the chat panel as well. One moment. Download link. There we go. And send. If you click here and download the zip file, okay, I'm just going to save that. In that zip file, you will find, so let me just unzip this, extract all. Yeah. Don't forget to extract it though, because if you open something from a zip file in Delphi, Delphi doesn't like that. Okay, so there's a doc here, and that's actually the PDF that's also in the handout. Looks like that. And you can see if you open it separately, it just works. Okay, and if you go back to the file itself, what we'll be doing is expanding on what we created in day 3, which is this, and we'll be creating this, part 4. That's for today. So you can just copy these two over to your working directory and use them as is. Obviously, I already have them here. Okay. Just a short recap of what we created yesterday and the day before. A key value web server that supports get, boost, post, and get, put, post, and delete. That's it. And that web service was created with Web Broker. Now, yesterday we got a number of questions regarding DataSnap and Red Server. Those are two other technologies not covered in this workshop, but I added some slides just to make sure that we can discuss that a bit. So what we created was a web service with Web Broker that's actually included in the Community Edition. So with the Community Edition, you can create web services with Web Broker in Delphi. It's a minimal server. It requires you to do some manual work for REST and HTTP requests and to build some JSON, but there's no licensing fee involved, and you can just use that. And this is actually what we did in this workshop. But there's also another option. You can also use DataSnap. So if you buy Delphi Enterprise, you'll get DataSnap with an unlimited usage license. So there's no licensing fee. You can just freely deploy that as soon as you have Delphi Enterprise. And that's also a web broker based server. It's a normal server, and it easily supports sending data sets and database related data over the internet. It's also using REST and HTTP requests and some JSON formatting as well. But it's all embedded, and it's much easier to create REST endpoints with a DataSnap web broker server. It's not covered in this workshop, but you may notice that if I want to do a key value, you can actually just create a method like this with a key as a string and then return value as a string, and then result is value. And that will actually be returned as a REST compatible string. So this is all you have to code in DataSnap, whereas you have to code this in WebBroker. So it's easier. On the other hand, WebBroker is more low level, so it allows you to customize more. So there's the downsides and upsides. And there's also Red Server. Red Server is actually a complete backend platform, partially based on WebBroker, but there's some other technologies in there as well. And all REST endpoints and REST HTTP requests and JSON stuff, you can create those with a wizard. So just file new, add endpoint, stuff like that. You can also view current activity and users in HTML pages. That's the question I got yesterday. Can you see which users are there? What connectivity what connections are open? With Red Server, you can. Obviously, you can also do that in Internet Information Services Server or in Apache. The licensing for a Red Server actually includes the use of an interface, but again, not covered in this workshop. Hopefully, this answers some of the questions I got yesterday as well. But today we'll be focusing on web servers, WebBroker target, web services with WebBroker. And we'll start with the target deployment options. So if you've created a WebBroker web service, you obviously want to deploy it to a production environment. So far, we've been creating a standalone GUI application, which is in the middle. And that standalone GUI application is just fine for debugging, but it's not meant to be deployed. You can actually deploy it, and I've noticed some people actually deploying the standalone GUI application as a web server, and that works, but it's quite limited in its handling of concurrent connections and all that. Internally, it uses an Indie HTTP server, which is fine. It's stable and it works dependably. But if you want to scale up, you will probably want to deploy either as an Apache dynamic link module, which runs on a Linux, or as an ISAPI dynamic link library, which runs on the Internet Information Services. And this one here, the ISAPI dynamic link library, is the one that we'll be creating today. If you look at the web servers that are available worldwide and used worldwide, this is actually a live view of, well, not live, just snapshotted this morning, but this is the view of the current distribution of usage of web services. You'll see that Nginx is the most used. Then it's Apache, then Cloudflare, Lightspeed, and then Microsoft IIS. Today we're targeting Microsoft IIS. And why are we doing that? Because Microsoft IIS is actually mostly used both for internet as well as intranet. So if you're creating business applications, a lot of businesses will have a intranet version of Microsoft IIS. The benefit of businesses for using IIS is that the authentication will be single sign-on, and you'll be able to actually use Active Directory as well. So there are some access rights will be handled for you if you're logged into the domain of that business. So for business applications, using IIS actually makes a lot of sense. You can, of course, also use Apache for that. That works as well, but it doesn't integrate as well with Active Directory. Obviously, because Active Directory is a Microsoft game. If you look at the differences, so IIS is intranet and internet. You also have the option to create Apache modules with WebBroker. It's not something that we'll do today, but we'll do that later on in an article or in the Blaise Pascal magazine. Apache is mostly used on the internet and handles just below 10,000 clients. And then there's Nginx. Nginx is also mostly used for internet and handles more than 10,000 clients. So you'll think that Nginx is actually faster, which it is, but Nginx is optimized for static content. And it's not that ideally suited for a Apache module that we are creating now. Although you can run an Apache module on the Nginx, it doesn't really make sense to do so. You probably then just install Nginx, install Apache, and then install a sort of like a pass-through from Nginx to Apache. But you'll still be running on Apache. Okay, so we're going to continue with the Internet Information Services Server. IIS is included in Microsoft, and if you're running Windows 10, there's a IIS in there as well that we're going to activate. You can also use an IIS on a Windows server if you have a Windows server around, but they'll work as fine. In Microsoft IIS, you'll have a ISAPI file that is a DLL file, and that will be loaded by IIS, and that will contain the web service that we've just written. There are options for optimization using web gardens, using clusters, using application pools. There's a lot of information to be found on IIS. This is a link to some of the performance tuning that you can do for IIS. But first, we're going to install IIS on our local machine. Installing IIS locally on the development machine just means that you have to turn a Windows feature on or off. That's it, and that's what you're going to do. Usually you'll have 3 or 4 machines with IIS installed, one on your development machine, one on a separate Windows server, maybe internally in your network, one on a hosted VPS solution for production. Although you can also host that yourself if you want to. It's all optional. Maybe because it's the summer camp, I just take a look at DTAP as well. Development, testing, acceptance, production. It's one of the things that you'll probably do when you're deploying web services, because you'll have a development server and test server and acceptance server and a production server. And the whole idea of DTAP is actually described in Wikipedia. So it's quite well described there. Okay, so we're going to install an Apache. No, sorry, IIS server. Let's start with that. Minimize this and minimize this here. This one here and here. Okay, so if you go to the search bar here, and just go to control panel. Actually, what I'm going to do today, you can just follow through with the PDF file of the entire session as in the handout. So it's basically that, but I'll deviate a bit somewhere, but not that much. In the control panel, you'll find programs. And under programs, you can turn Windows features on and off. Now, there are a lot of users who've never seen that Windows features turning on and off. There are actually some nice features hidden there. For instance, using Hyper-V or Microsoft Print to PDF if it's not working. Okay, so what we're going to do here is just turn on Internet Information Services. On my machine, that has already been done because I didn't want to wait for the Internet Information Services to be installed. To be honest, it can take between 5 to 10 minutes, and we'd all be waiting patiently for it to complete. I wouldn't want to do that online in this presentation. But do go ahead and just click Internet Information Services, then click OK, and it will install Internet Information Services for you while we continue with our presentation. And again, you can find the detailed steps in the PDF accompanying the workshop. Okay, so the next step after installing the Internet Information Services is actually creating the ISAPI. When we created our web services in the past few days, we created a web module. And that web module actually had actions for get, put, post, and delete, and was used in a standalone GUI application that resulted in a web service server executable. So if you take a look at that, how that works, just go back here. We'll see that if I open the web service part 3 that we created yesterday, there's a web service server GUI version here. And if I run that, it will run a web service. I can see that in the browser. I can just go to key value and request the value for 0, which is returned in JSON. The raw data is actually a JSON string. Okay, that works. But what I'm going to do today is I'm going to add a ISAPI DLL to that. So if you go back here, you'll see that one web module can have multiple targets. So we're going to share that web module that we've written for the standalone GUI application. We're going to use that for the IIS ISAPI version of the web service. We're going to call that web service ISAPI. So I'm just going to go back to Delphi. And in Delphi, I'm going to create a new web broker application. I'm going to save that locally. And after that, I will merge that one with the existing web service server GUI. So file, new, other, and under web, I'm going to choose web server application. Okay. This one's going to run on Windows. And it's not going to be a standalone GUI application, but it's going to be an ISAPI dynamic link library. Notice that you can also use Apache here, but that's for Windows, not for Linux. But if you go to Linux, you get Apache as well. But here we're going to use ISAPI dynamic link library and then finish. And I'm going to save that all into an ISAPI subdirectory in my demo directory. So there I'm going to use here. Well, let's put it here. Why not? New folder, ISAPI. Save. Save. Okay, I forgot to rename the project. So I'm just going to save the project as Web Service ISAPI. That will also be the name of your DLL file at the end of the session. So Web Service ISAPI. Close all. Well, no, let's not close all. Let's take a look at the web module unit. If you look at the web module unit, you'll see it's identical to the web module unit that we had in the other web server, the GUI version. One difference though is that the web module unit itself will have class group system classes t-persistent, whereas the one from our previous web servers will have a web module unit that VCL controls tcontrol class group. What does that mean? That means that the web service server GUI is actually using the VCL framework. And by setting the class group, you're actually limiting the controls that you can drag and drop onto that web module. And it's also changing some of its behavior. What we want to do is we're going to merge the ISAPI version here and use the web module unit, not from the ISAPI version, but we're going to use the web module unit from the earlier web service server that we created the past few days, because this one's empty, so we don't want to use that one. But we have to remember that we set the class group to t-persistent. Okay, I'm just going to do that. I'm just going to use the file explorer to copy the files over, because that's basically what is needed here. On the demo, we created web service part 3, and then we go to ISAPI. The web module unit, I don't want to copy that one, I just want to copy the web service ISAPI data. And just copy that over to the web service server. Okay, that's it. Then I'm going to reopen the project group for web service part 3. And in that project group, I'm going to add the existing project that I just copied over. And this now has the web module unit shared with, as you can see, all these key value information. This is now shared with the web module unit from web service GUI. So this is the same web module unit with this header here, demo web service. This is actually the same. Okay, so remember that I said that we needed to change the class group. Now let's do that now. Just go here and then change that class group here to t-persistent. If you forget to do that, it's not that big a deal. It will still work. But you may end up with some controls that you're placing here that don't work in the ISAPI version because they're not cross-platform or let's say they are VCL specific. So you should probably not do that. Okay, so this ISAPI is now actually finished. This is all that you have to do. This is it. Okay, so what I'm going to do is then build this, and then after that I'm going to go to some of the questions. So ISAPI that we're using locally here, most ISAPIs actually, there are 64-bit. So we need to do some additional steps here to configure our internet information server. but we also need to make sure that our target is actually a 64-bit DLL. So here on the web service ISAPI, I'm going to change the target platform and add Windows 64-bit and make that platform active. Then I'm going to remove the 32-bit version because I don't really need it. And if I accidentally create a 32-bit ISAPI DLL and try to load that in IIS 64-bit, that's not pretty. So let's not do that. Build a release version, why not? And just build that. Click, build, right click and build. And it's done. If I go to the directory here, show in Explorer, you'll see the release version of your web service ISAPI over here. And this is the one that we're going to deploy to our IIS server. So what we did is install IIS in the background while I'm talking about how I created the ISAPI of our previously coded web service. I'm going to take a look at some of the questions. Let me go over here. What is the downside of developing testing with IIS Express as opposed to full IIS? Okay, so that's a question from Patrick. That's actually a good question. To be honest, you have to have a full-blown IIS testing server and exception server. And for development locally, you'll use the IIS version embedded in Windows 10, which is somewhat more limited, but not that much more limited. If you go take a look at the IIS here, in the, well, let's go to IIS here with computer management, under services, Internet Information Services, and then go here. You'll see it's pretty elaborate already. There's application pools, there's sites that you can create. There are a lot of options here already. So it's somewhat more limited, but not that much more limited than IIS Express. So for development and local development, it's fine, but you will want to run on a test and application server as well with a full-blown IIS. Hopefully that answers the question. Okay, so there's a remark here on Nginx. It would help to have Nginx modules as well. Okay, so there is actually the option to add Nginx plugins. That's true. To be honest, I haven't looked at Nginx plugins lately, so maybe that's a nice thing to discuss or further on. So it would be nice to actually go back to that. Another question. I try to move a license among PCs, but it reaches 3 times limitation. Yeah, just try to get a new registration. You can actually call the support for that or just ping them. And for the CE edition, it's fine if you do that. You'll probably be successful on that. Okay, so let's continue with what we have here. Okay, so we installed the Internet Information Services, hopefully successfully. If you have, we still need to configure it to actually allow it to run ISAPI, because by default, ISAPI is actually disabled on Internet Information Server. So our next step is to actually enable ISAPI extensions and then also enable handler mappings. That's actually in computer management. And under services and applications, you'll find Internet Information Services. I'm just going to maximize that and go here. Now, if you have opened this and you're not seeing ISAPI and CGI restrictions here, which is the black one with the red stop sign, that means that you're missing the ISAPI feature. And the ISAPI feature then needs to be installed with the control panel. And then you go to Programs and Windows Features. in which case you need to enable under Internet Information Services the feature for, and where is that? It's under Application Development Features, ISAPI extensions. Now we're using ISAPI extensions. You can also write ISAPI filters, which is a different thing. It's filters traffic. ISAPI extension actually extends the capabilities of IIS. So this is what you need, ISAPI extensions. After you've enabled that, maybe you'll have to restart, which I'm obviously not going to do, but then you'll have the ISAPI and CGI restrictions over here. And under handler mappings, you would also have the option to actually have ISAPI DLLs enabled. Now, handler mappings are specific either to the machine or to a website. And if you look here, I want to enable handler mappings for ISAPI DLLs. But to keep it as safe as possible, I want to do that for the specific website where I want to support ISAPI DLLs. So I don't want to enable that here on the entire machine. I want to enable it to the specific website that I'm using to service the ISAPI DLL. And I've already done that. It just means that you go here to handler mappings and just enable it. That's it. So just go there and enable it. Okay, so on the default website, handler mappings, I've already enabled it. You can also remove that or disable it. That means that we've pre-configured IIS to actually handle ISAPI DLLs, but then we need to make sure that IIS actually knows about our new ISAPI DLL. There's two steps involved. One of them is actually copying it over. So on the Win64 release, I'm going to copy over the web service ISAPI DLL to the inet pub www root. In order to do that, I have to first copy it to a temp folder, because otherwise the Windows security will interfere. And then copy that over to the inet pub root directory. And continue. It's not a local web service ISAPI DLL. This one will not run yet. So if we go to HTTP localhost, because I installed IIS, it will now run on port 80. You get this. This is the default. This is actually just a display of this IIS start. Let me see here in the inet pub www root. This is just this IIS start and IIS start PNG. So if you open this one here, just view it. Can I just view it? Well, Paint 3D, why not? Okay, so I'm just going to leave that, but it's just a PNG. So this is just this PNG, this picture here. And if I try to open the web service ISAPI DLL, you get this. The page you're requesting cannot be served because the ISAPI restriction is setting on the web server. So we need to make sure that it's actually possible to open the ISAPI DLL. And that's done with the ISAPI CGI restrictions that we just enabled. I'll do that on the default website instead. Well, no, you have to do that on the root folder. Sorry, the other one's from the handler mappings. So in the ISAPI CGI restrictions, I'm going to add the path to the ISAPI DLL. So on the C, inet pub, root, we're going to add the ISAPI DLL. And this is actually the summer camp 2021 web service. And we allow the extension path to execute. That's allowed. That's it. So we should now be able to open this one. So if we go to localhost slash web service ISAPI, it should now work, and it does. And just go to slash value slash 0. We'll see the predefined 0 value in our web service. So that's just installing a ISAPI version of your web service. Now we'll also be doing that on an actual VPS, so you can play around with it a bit. It's a VPS that you can actually connect over to the internet. So that should work fine. Okay, so let's go back to the slides. Configure Internet Information Server, so that's handler mappings as well as the ISAPI extensions, and we did configure the ISAPI CGI restrictions. If you search on running an ISAPI module, you'll still find people telling you to allow unspecified ISAPI modules. Please don't do that, because anyone who's able to actually upload the DLL file to any location on your web server will be able to execute that. And to be honest, that's not good. So what you always have to do is add a specific ISAPI or CGI restriction. If you choose to do this, it's at your own peril. So I wouldn't do that. So there's a red cross there, well, or a band-aid, I'm not sure, but you'll probably need a band-aid after you did that. Please don't. Okay, so there are some other configurations that we'd like to do here. And another one is the ISAPI application pool. Why would you want to do that? Well, the ISAPI application pool is actually handling the lifetime of our ISAPI DLL. That means our ISAPI DLL will only exist as long as the ISAPI application pool allows it to exist in memory. So if an end user connects to it, it'll load the ISAPI DLL into memory, and after 15 minutes or 30 minutes of inactivity, it will automatically kill it and disable it and remove it from memory, which is fine for normal ISAPI DLLs. But as you may remember, our ISAPI DLL is actually using in-memory storage. So if you go to here in our web service, we are actually using a key value store in a dictionary that's just in memory. It's not persisted. So we can allow our ISAPI DLL to actually be edited to memory and then run for, say, 24 hours. We could actually use it for an entire day. Obviously, you could also increase that period, but 24 hours is a nice one. Okay, so I'm going to go to the computer management. I've got two of them running actually. So come to computer management, and I'll go to the application pools. And the default website here is running under the default application pool. And if you go here and then use basic settings, not the basic settings, the advanced settings or recycling settings, you can just reset that to a specific time, and make sure that that specific time is something that you would like. So let's put 0000 here. This is 12 o'clock at night. Next. And the recycle event is not on demand, but it's, well, on demand is fine. Unhealthy is obviously fine. Yeah, sure. And then do that on scheduled times. Yep, it's fine. So this is all fine. So, okay. That should make sure that the ISAPI DLL actually stays in memory. So if we use our web services client that we created in the past few days, and then instead of going to localhost 8080, we'll go to web service ISAPI.dll and request the key value there, which is 0. We can also put some value in there and make that summer camp 2021 and put that. And if we get it, we should get that back. There's actually a carriage return line feed behind it. I didn't type that. Okay. Then this should actually stay there for as long as my computer is running until 12 o'clock at night. And then it will disappear. That's one of the things that you have to do as well. Okay, application pool. Now let's do some additional testing because there are some other issues that we may encounter. But before we do that, let's take a look at the questions that have come up. Let me see here. If instead of using a ISAPI DLL or Windows Service is used, is it better or worse? Actually, it's different. Maybe not a good answer, but suppose you have a server that already has the capability of running IIS and it's okay to run IIS on that server, then you would probably prefer to use ISAPI because it's more stable. And ISAPI actually has, as you can see in the recycling events for the application pool, it has some capabilities of detecting a crash in the ISAPI DLL and then recycling it, making it automatically restart if something goes wrong. Where a Windows service, you can also enable that in Windows services. If a Windows service crashes, you can re-enable it, but it's more finicky. But the benefit of using a Windows service, because you can use a Windows service, is that it takes less memory and less CPU resources. So it's lighter on your server. Suppose you have a database server that you're using and you wanted to add a simple web service to it, you would maybe prefer doing that with a Windows service. But keep in mind that Windows service will probably also consume some memory, and that Windows service will be based on, let me go back here, on the HTTP server, so it's less capable. So there's actually an option missing here, the standalone GUI application, standalone COSL application. There's an additional option, which is a standalone Windows service. But you'd have to create that Windows service yourself. It's not that hard to create one though. A pretty good question, thank you. Okay, let's continue with the presentation and take a look at course. But first, let's demonstrate that course is real. And you may remember that we created a HTML JavaScript bit in our web service. So under localhost, let me see here, /web service ISAPI DLL. What we did was create a JavaScript handler, and that would return a HTML file with some JavaScript in there. And you could get the number in the console log. So just calling into number, you get a random number. Or not. So what's going on here? Cross-origin resected request blocked. Okay, it's localhost 8080. Oh, right, you'll think, oh, that's just that. Okay, so I'm going to fix that. Because I was using the web pointing unit here. And the HTML here is actually calling into a different server, port 8080. And it shouldn't do that anymore. It should go to /web service ISAPI DLL /number. Okay, so that should do it. Well, not entirely, but that's a spoiler. So I'll just continue and then project build web service ISAPI. Then I'm going to copy that over. That new ISAPI DLL, I'm going to copy that over to the temp folder and then copy it over to inetpub. Now, if you try to copy this over, I just told IIS to keep the ISAPI DLL in memory. So if I try to copy this over, it's going to fail. Can't be completed because it's open. Yeah, obviously it's open because it's open in IIS. IIS is keeping it in memory. So what I need to do in IIS is recycle the application pool here and then recycle. They'll reset the ISAPI DLLs that are loaded inside the application pool. So recycle that one. Now it's unloaded from memory and I should be able to replace it. And I replaced it. Just reopen it. Localhost /web service. Well, key value 0, that works, but does JavaScript work? Ctrl+Shift+I. Yeah, it works. It's actually an XAR request and it gets number 0. Okay, that's kind of a coincidence to getting a 0 on the first try. Okay, 0386, that actually works. But does it? It's because if I go not to local host, but I go to 127.0.0.1, and if you know anything about networks, you'll know that local host is actually the same as 127.0.0.1. That's actually the IP address of localhost for your local installation. And open that, it'll just open. But if I now get number in the console log, I again get the cross-origin request that's blocked. So what's happening here? This is what's happening, which is kind of a somewhat complicated picture. Okay, so JavaScript is making a cross-domain call because it's going from 127.0.0.1 to localhost. Is it a get or a head? Well, yes, it's a get. Are there custom HTTP headers? Well, actually there are, because JavaScript is adding those. And then it's going to call into my web service with an options call. And that options call should reply whether or not access control is enabled across multiple domains. And if it's not, or if it doesn't add those access control headers, the error will occur. And we haven't done anything like that in our web service. So we need to add some capability in our web service to respond correctly to access control header requests. Okay, so let's do that. I'm not going to type that out because I don't have the time for that, but I'm going to just copy that over. And you can do the same. So if you go to source, and that is in your demo directory, for me that's a demo directory, and go to web service server, I've got the web module unit here, and I'm going to open that in Notepad. And then I'm going to go to the core stuff here. What I'm going to add is this bit of course code. And that's also depicted in a slide here. Oh, there you go. Here. And that cross-origin resource sharing will allow our web service to correctly respond to a cross-origin resource request from JavaScript. Because the JavaScript request was going to ask, do you want to allow us to call you from a different domain? And our web service is going to reply, yeah, sure, it's fine. And it's going to add a access control allow origin with a star. And that will allow calling for all domains. So maybe you want to limit that to your own domains, because now anyone and everyone can call into your web service. So anyone and everyone can embed your web service in their website. And maybe you don't want that, so you could limit that. For now, we'll just leave it at that. We also need to add some access control request headers. And the access control request headers that the other websites actually requesting, we're just going to copy that over into the allow headers. Essentially, we're going to tell them anything that you ask of us, we can do that. And then we'll set handle to true. This is actually a normal request, and this one is actually an options request. If you set handle to true, it will not go to the actions handlers of your web service. So you shouldn't set handle to true all the time in the before dispatch, just for this one here. Okay, so just add that code to our web service. Here we go. Copy it. Development is all about copying, and you feel free to copy that code from my code as well. That's what it's for. Okay, so there's a before dispatch that I need to add here. That's the event on the web module unit. So before our request that enters our web module is dispatched to the action handlers, I'm going to do some additional actions. And one of them is the cross-origin resource sharing handlers. There's some additional stuff here as well. I'll just show you that. Because aside from issues with cores, you can also have an issue with client-side caching. If you do a GET request from a browser using JavaScript, it's quite possible that the browser will cache the request that you made, and on a subsequent request, you would get the old or stale data. So instead of getting a new number, you'd get the same number over and over and over again. Making you wonder, is my web service even working? Well, yes, your web service is working, but your browser is actually caching the GET request. In order to prevent that from happening, you have to tell the browser to not cache it, to not store it, and to revalidate always. Setting a pragma no cache as well, and making sure that anything it does still cache, it expires in 0 seconds. So that's it. So it's kind of like multiple options. Why are there multiple options? Because some browsers behave differently. So if you're using Opera or Firefox or Chrome or or Edge. Edge is actually now based on the Chrome engine, so it's behaving like Chrome. These are going to respond differently to these settings. But this will work fine. Okay, so in our code, we actually have some adding of pairs with the cache, no cache, pragma, no cache expires. This is always added to our response, as well as this one here. But these are only added if the option call comes in with the access control request headers. And in one of the days, I got a question of how to support options in a web model unit. I told them that it was possible, but quite different. It is. So if you go to web action items and you try to add a item and then try to get the meta type to set to options, there isn't one here for options. You can use empty any, but that doesn't really cover it, although that would work as well. But the thing here is that this before dispatch here, what we're doing here is actually sort of responding to the options request, because it's in the options request where the access control request headers is called, as you can see in this schematic here. Make an options call with the custom details and require the access control headers. Okay, so with these changes, I'm just going to save that and build it. Build, where's the build? Build sooner, build later. No, project build. Okay, and then go to the file explorer. Show that it's 48 already, so time flies. And then copy that over to our temp folder and replace the file in the destination. And then copy that over to our init pub. But we have to recycle the application pool first. Recycle, and then replace that in the inet pub root. Paste that. Replace it. Continue. And everything should now work out just fine. Just refresh this. And then get an Armory console. And it does work. Okay. So we fixed our course request. Let's take a look at some of the questions here. So, yeah, we're good. We're all good, I think. If you're puzzled by course cross-origin resource sharing, you can read on cross-origin resource sharing in Wikipedia as well. It's quite well explained. This picture is actually from Wikipedia. Next up is deploying this stuff not to your development server, but deploying it to your actual server in your production environment. Now, what I'm usually using for production environments are virtual private servers that I host with hosting providers that are not Azure or Amazon or whatever. The reason for that is that most web services in Europe have to comply with GDPR, and some of them are actually extra restrictive for the country that I live in the Netherlands. Some financial data can never be shared outside of the border, or medical data can never be shared outside of the border. That means that I actually have to use local hosting providers. For you, that may not be true, so maybe you'll use Azure or something like that. Keep in mind that if you're using Azure or Amazon Web Services, that there are some caveats to that, some limited transactions that may lead to additional charges. So make sure that you know what you're doing when you're setting up a virtual machine, because it sounds cheap, just $18 a month or $21 a month for a Windows version. And the Windows version, the Microsoft version, is the one you'll need for this specific web service. But we can also create a Apache module, and then you'll be able to use the $18 a month version of Azure. But make sure that you set the options correctly so you don't get into additional costs that could be unexpectedly high. A colleague of mine actually had a denial of service attack on his web service. It was senseless, obviously, but the amount of transactions meant that he got a more than $1,000 charge for his 1 month usage, and that's painful. Okay, so be careful. Well, we have a virtual private server in our cloud, and I'm going to connect to that. I'm going to show you some stuff here on Let's Encrypt, as well as deploying to the virtual private server. Okay, so just go to the virtual private server and run mtsc. And that virtual private server is on delphiacademy.nl, and you can actually reach that. So if you want to, you can then call into our web service live. Okay, so I'm going to upload the web service, ISAPI DLL. Usually copy paste just works, but I'll just try that. Maybe it doesn't work. We'll see. I'll just go to C upload. Oh, it's actually, I've already uploaded it. I'll just use this one here. That's fine. Okay, so I'm just going to copy that and copy that to the inet pub root, and then copy it over here. Paste it. Continue. So web service ISAPI is now copied over into the web root of Delphi Academy. That means that we still have to configure it as well. So let's go to inet manager and go to Internet Information Services and make sure that our ISAPI restriction is actually enabled. So I'm going to add that path to our web service ISAPI, solid panel 2021, and allow it to execute. And that should work. So I should now be able to go from a different location and go to https://delphi-academy.nl/web-service-isapi.dll. Yeah, and it does. And then should go to key value /0. That's 0. And if I use this here in my web service GUI client, not that one, this is the server. I should choose the client, of course. So if we go to the client and then go to Delphi Academy and then get that data, it works. And I can actually put summer camp 2021 in there. And if someone's fast enough, you can now change that text. So if I get it, I'll get your text. No one has changed it yet, so that's just fine. Okay, so you can go there and you can try this out yourself. I'll keep the web server service ISAPI DLL running for a bit, so you can experiment that with your web service client. Okay, it's actually 17:54, so we've got 5 minutes until ending time. I wanted to show you something on Let's Encrypt. I also want to go into some of the questions. I'll just go in the questions list and take a look. The random function seems to produce the same series of numbers. Yeah, is it really random or pseudo-random? That's actually a good question. I forgot to add a randomize, because the randomize initializes the random tables with random numbers, and otherwise the random tables are initialized with predictable numbers. Please don't ask me why, but that's what it is. So if I go to the number code over here, where's number? It's a good call actually. So number, and number. Where's number? Where's the get number action? No, I just missed it. I'm using random here, and what I should do is call randomize, and that should fix it. So just call randomize. I'll put that in the chat as well. Randomize is the answer. Thank you for putting that. Okay. Some additional questions as well. Another chance there. Some of these questions I can actually do with chat. So what I'll do is after 6, I'll disconnect the session. Well, not disconnect the session, but I'll pause the session and I won't be speaking anymore, but I'll be answering questions in chat. So that'll give you guys options to actually get some more questions out there, because this is the last session of REST web services. Okay, so some things on Let's Encrypt. The server that I'm using, it's not using HTTP, it's using HTTPS. How did I install that? It's actually quite easy to install HTTPS on your IIS server, because you can use Let's Encrypt certificates. Let's Encrypt certificates, if you go to let'sencrypt.org, you'll get some explanation on that. It's a non-profit certificate authority. It creates a lot of certificates for everyone, and those certificates are free. And there are some scripts available, or even some software available to automatically install those certificates on your web server. And they're valid, they're perfectly valid. Google accepts them, any other browser, they work just fine. The certificate installer that I'm using is actually WinAcme. You don't have to use WinAcme, it's the one that I prefer, because you can actually use PowerShell to change how this works. So you can sort of optimize and change that with PowerShell. And that's one reason for me to use this one here. There's no other, there are multiple options though. You can also find multiple options on the Let's Encrypt website. So just wanted to put one out there that actually works fine. The certificate authorities, there are a number of certificate authorities. The Let's Encrypt has a base level certificate, but there are some more higher level trust certificates. They're specifically used for banks and financial and medical institutes or other sensitive data. What that adds, because the Let's Encrypt certificate doesn't do that, but this adds your requirement to actually upload a copy of your passport. You have to make sure that you know, or that anyone knows who's behind the website. Sometimes you have to upload business documents. So it's more work, but it's a higher level of trust, so that you know that Google.com is actually from Google, and not from someone who just got hold of the Google domain. And these are the rankings for the different certificate authorities. You can see that Let's Encrypt is only used for 1.6%. To be honest, there are a lot of hidden web services that use Let's Encrypt, and they will not show up here because those web services are not registered in DNS. So I think the actual count of Let's Encrypt certificates is higher than this one here, but that's just my hunch. Okay, we're almost done. If you're interested in deployment in Apache on Linux, please take a look at the next article to be published in Blaise Pascal magazine. It will handle Ubuntu configuration, Apache model creation, installation, and will go into Windows subsystem for Linux as well. It will be published somewhere in August, September 2021. Just take a look at the Blaise Pascal magazine website here, and you can do a trial, and you'll get some free samples for that. I'm just going to copy the link to that as well. People in the chat. Okay, send that. Close tabs. Yeah, sure. Okay, so thank you for listening in. It's 6 o'clock, so we're going to end the audio part of our seminar, and I'm going to answer some questions in the chat. So if you keep your chat window open and have some questions, please post them there, and I'll try to answer them as best as I can. Thank you for being here, and hope to see you in other sessions, in upcoming seminars and upcoming sessions for the rest of the year. Okay, thanks all. Bye.